Welcome to my mini felt cat tutorial. In this video, I'll go over how to make a simple single color cat. This is a supplementary video to my pattern that I have available on my shops, which are linked down below. Feel free to pause the video to read the supplies list. I do go more into depth about the supplies in the instructions. And then out of these three options, you'll just want to pick which one you prefer. To start, you'll want to cut out the printed pattern. If you have a Cricut or similar machine, I have also included the SVG files that you can use. Some people roughly cut out the paper pieces, tape them onto the felt, and then cut more precisely around them. I prefer cutting the pieces precisely first, that way I can plan where I want to place them on the felt, just so I can use up as much of the felt as I can. But either way works, so go with what feels easier for you. And then to transfer the patterns to the felt, I personally prefer using Scotch tape, just because it's easy to use and remove. You can also use a heat erasable pen or freezer paper. One thing you do want to be careful of though with a heat erasable pen is that when you're tracing the outline and then cutting it, not to cut the felt piece bigger than the pattern size. And then for the toe beans and inner ears, you do want to use pink felt. These can be a bit trickier to cut out because of how small they are, so I recommend using sharp fabric scissors. And now we're ready to begin sewing. A little trick to prevent a tangled floss is to pull the thread from the side that has the numbers on it. Embroidery floss is made up of 6 strands. Throughout this video, we'll be using either 1 or 2 strands of thread depending on what we're sewing. And this is just because using one strand blends in better with the felt and makes it look a lot more delicate. An easy way to tie a knot is to grab the end of the thread, place it on top of your needle, and then wrap the thread around the needle a couple of times, depending on the size you want your knot to be. Then pinch all of that, and grab your needle, and pull through until you reach the end of the thread. And then you'll have your knot, and you just want to cut off whatever excess thread is left. We're going to start off by sewing the ears together. Take one pink inner ear piece and place it on top of one outer ear. We'll be doing a ladder stitch to sew the pieces together. Think of it like making rungs on a ladder. Getting your pink thread, go up through the pink felt, cross over to the orange felt, and then you'll want to go down through the orange felt. Next, we want to go up a stitch length through the back and then come back up through the orange. Cross over to the pink and then go back down. We want to make sure we're making small stitches and keeping it close to the edges. Go up another stitch length through the pink, over to the orange, and back down. And just repeat this until you reach the end. Once you're at the end, on the back of the ear, you'll want to weave your needle lightly through the felt to one of the stitches, just so that we can anchor it there. And then here, we'll just want to tie off the thread. And that's one earpiece done. And I'm just going to repeat this process for the second piece we need to make, just from a slightly different angle. starting with knotting the pink floss. And then again, ladder stitching the pieces together. And same as before, we'll just want to tie off in the back. And that's the second piece of the ear finished. Next, we'll want to get one strand of the main body color floss and thread your needle. To start, we want to add an outer ear piece to the back of one of the pieces we just sewed to complete an ear. We'll be doing a blanket stitch around the top edges of the ear to create an ear shape, but we'll be leaving the bottom open. To start, sew your needle going from the front to the back of the back ear piece. Next, we'll be sewing through the front ear piece, starting from the front and sewing to the back where we started from. Before pulling your thread all the way through this loop we created, you'll want to loop your needle through twice to double knot it. This helps to secure it so that the first stitch won't be lopsided. that's your first blanket stitch. To keep going, you want to stitch front to back, and making sure that the thread is behind the needle before pulling through. And just repeat this, keeping your stitches small and even until you reach the opposite side. Once you're at the end, to finish your blanket stitch, you just want to go through the loop twice, which will create a double knot that secures your stitch. Then to hide your thread end, you just want to weave your way through the front hole that you created. And weave your needle through the inside of the ear. And then cut your thread. And we'll just be repeating that for the other ear. Next, we're going to be sewing the head panels together. Use one strand of your main body color floss. Bring two head panels together so they overlap. We'll be doing a ladder stitch to join them. To start, sew through the front of the back panel and exit to the back. We'll want to keep the stitches fairly close to the edge, but not too close that the stitches will rip through. Cross over to the front panel, going through it, moving a stitch length down, then coming back up through the front panel. When making these stitches, you want to make sure that they sit fairly straight across and not crooked, and that they sit parallel next to each other. Cross over again to the back panel, sewing through it, moving a stitch length down and then back out through the back panel. It'll look best if you try to keep your stitches even and small. Once you get about a third or halfway down, I recommend pulling the ladder stitch closed. If you wait until the very end, it'll be harder to close and your thread might snap. And then just continue stitching until you reach the end. Once you've made your last stitch, just pull it closed one last time. On the inside bowl of the head, you'll just want to pick up some felt or a stitch that you can anchor your thread on to tie it off. And you just want to make sure to tie off between adding each panel so that the stitches don't loosen up too much. If your thread is long enough, you can just keep the same thread going even after tying it off. Now add another panel to one of the edges and line it up. And we'll just be repeating the same process as before. Since I'm just continuing with the same thread even after tying it off, I want to start by going through the front of the back panel and exit to the back. And same as before, cross over to the front panel, sew through, go down a stitch, and then come out through the front panel. And repeat. Again, once you get to a third or halfway down, making sure to pull closed, and then once you get to the end, also pulling closed so that your thread won't snap. And same as before, just tying off at the end so our stitches won't loosen up. Now we'll be adding our last panel. I am slightly changing the way I'm starting this time by going through my last panel first. And that way I can just cross over easier, but it doesn't really matter. You can start by going either way. And now we're at our last edge. We'll want to stitch halfway down and then stop so that we have space to stuff it before sewing it closed. So I'll stop about here and then pull my blanket stitch. And then I'll get my stuffing. You can use regular stuffing or felt scraps for this. Just keep in mind if you use felt scraps, make sure the colors you stuff it with don't show through the felt. I'll add as much stuffing as I can, making sure the head is rounded and evenly stuffed. I think about that much is good, so I'll continue sewing it closed. And then when you're pulling it closed, you might want to push your stuffing down a little bit, or else they might get caught between your stitches. So now I'm at the end, I need to tie off my stitch. So I can choose which side I want to be the top or the bottom, say if one side looks better than the other. And so if I'm at the side that I want to be at, I tie off. If I want to go to the other side, I'll just weave my needle through to the other side and then tie off there. Since the base of the head will be connected to the body, any knots on the bottom of the head will be hidden. Next, we want to get a small amount of stuffing to stuff the ears, and that'll just help them hold their shape. And I just use my scissors to stuff them in. To start attaching the ears to the head, you'll want to get a sewing needle to pin the ear to the head, and then just adjust its position so it sits where you want. Grab one strand of your main body color floss. We'll be sewing the base of the ears to the head using ladder stitch. To hide your knots, enter from the bottom of the head, exiting up at the top next to the ear. Make small ladder stitches all the way around and just keep an eye on the position of the ear so it doesn't shift too much from where you want it to sit. And then once you get to the front, I find it looks best if you don't sew through the pink inner ear. So I try to go behind it to the orange it's sewn on to make my stitches. And then once you're done, just exit through the bottom of the head and tie off there. And then once the ear is sewn on, you can remove the needle that is pinning it in place. And then just repeat this process for the second ear. I'll be going over all three options for adding eyes, starting with beads. You'll want to get one strand of black embroidery floss. And then you'll want to make sure that your needle is thin enough that when you thread your bead, that your bead can pass over it. So you can see this needle is a bit too thick and the bead doesn't pass over the needle. So for where I want the eyes to sit, I kind of imagine halfway down vertically and then half horizontally. I start by going up through the bottom of the head and I aim for where I want the eyes to sit. And I also imagine splitting the front panel into fourths vertically. And then the eyes would sit on the second and third sections. So I'll want to thread my bead. And then slightly next to where I came up from, I'll want to stitch down, aiming for the bottom of the head. And then tie off at the bottom to secure it. You might also need to adjust the bead slightly to make sure it sits evenly on the thread. And I just repeat this process for the other eye. I do find that beads stick out a bit more than the other options, but if you're going for a cat that has a more of a buggy-eyed look, I think these would be great. Option 2 is doing a French knot. You'll want to get 2 strands of black embroidery floss. And then similar to how we did the beads, you'll want to enter from the bottom and aim for where you want the eyes to sit. Then create a French knot by wrapping the thread around the needle. The more times you wrap around, the larger the eyes will be. I typically do about 7 to 10 loops around. For this example, I wrapped it around 5 times, just to show you what it looks like. While holding the thread in one hand, I want to try and aim for the bottom of the head. at a spot that's slightly next to where I came up from. And then you want to make sure you're holding the thread taut while you're pulling the needle through, but not too tight. And then to finish, I just tie off at the bottom. And I just repeat this process for the other eye. This time I'm wrapping it around 7 times to show you the difference in size. And again, tying off at the bottom to secure the French knot. Option 3 is my favorite, which is the safety eyes. You'll want to use your owl or a sharp needle. In my case, I'm using an acne tool because I use what I have. And you create 2 deep holes where you want the eyes to sit. And then take your safety eyes and stick them into the holes you've made. If you're not happy with where they sit, you can just make new holes. Here I'm using the 3mm, and now I'm switching them for the 5mm just to show you the difference. I personally think that 5mm looks a bit too big, but it's up to personal preference. I think the perfect middle ground is the 4mm. Then to secure them in place, you just want to add a little bit of glue to the posts before sticking it back into the head. Now it's time to sew the nose. You want to get 2 strands of pink floss. 2 strands is a bit harder to separate than 1 strand, but do your best. Start from the bottom of the head and aim towards where you want your nose to start. And I recommend wrapping it over like this to visualize where you want the stitch to end. Then stitch down towards the bottom of the head. And repeat this process for the other 2 stitches. You want these stitches to be parallel right next to each other. You don't want to pull the stitches too tight, so if you have, you can just loosen them up a bit with your needle. And then to finish, tie off at the bottom. Get 2 strands of white floss to sew the whiskers. Start from the bottom of the head and aim towards where you want the whiskers to start. And like the nose, I find it helpful to drape across, and that way you can find the angle and length you want. And once you know where you want to end, just sew through towards the bottom. You can also stitch directly to the next whisker if you prefer. I just find it's easier to aim where you want them to start by going through the bottom of the head. For this cat, I did 2 whiskers, but you can do 2 or 3 depending on your preference. And that's everything for the head. Time to start sewing the body. You'll want to get 1 strand of your main body color floss. You'll want to start by lining up a side body piece to the mid body. And you'll want to line up the side body to the mid body, trying to center it between the 2 leg holes. So that when you take the mid body panel and fold it over, the leg holes evenly overlap, and the side body is centered between them. Once you're happy with where it sits, flip the side body on top of the mid body, and then get a needle to pin it in place. We'll be doing a blanket stitch to connect the side body pieces to the mid body. And we'll start from the middle of the pieces shown. We'll be going in one direction and sewing until we reach the end of the mid-body and then tie off. And then we'll restart where we began, but going in the opposite direction. To start, thread your needle through the inside of the mid-body panel. Then cross over and sew through the front of the side body back through the back of the mid body. And as always with your first blanket stitch, loop your needle through twice. And then continue blanket stitching. Once you get to the legs where the side body starts curving over, you'll want to wrap the mid body piece around and line up the edges with the side body. And then keep sewing until you reach the tail. Once you're at the end of the mid-body piece on the tail, you'll just want to tie off. And to do that, you'll just want to loop through twice on your last blanket stitch. And then go back through your last blanket stitch to hide the end of your thread. Next, we'll be starting from where we began, but just going in the opposite direction. Get another strand of your main body color floss. Then to restart a blanket stitch, you'll want to insert your needle between the last 2 stitches. Make sure that the middle thread that's connecting the blanket stitches is behind your needle. And then pull through. So from the front to the back, and then going through the loop twice like you would normally with your first blanket stitch. And then keep blanket stitching until you reach the end of the mid-body panel. And then again on your last blanket stitch, making sure to loop through twice. And sewing through your last blanket stitch to hide the end of the thread. Now we'll want to add the other side body panel and making sure to line it up so it's centered. And you can pin it in place if you prefer. I just held it in place because once you start stitching, it won't shift around. And then just repeat the same steps for this side body. And then as I'm attaching this piece and getting closer to the tail, I just want to make sure that the tail pieces stay aligned. And so I'm using a needle to pin them in place. And then again, the same process to restart your blanket stitch. And then now once you get to this last section where you'd normally tie off, you actually want to keep going with your blanket stitches to join the two panels of the tail together. And then just make sure that they stay aligned while you're sewing them together. Once you get to the end and meet up with your other blanket stitches, you'll just want to go through the loop twice to tie it off. And then going through the last blanket stitch to hide the end of your thread. Before we stuff the body and sew it closed, we'll want to add the details starting with the toe beans. Start by adding one toe bean centered on the bottom of one leg. And then you can see on these other examples roughly where I placed the toe beans. And get one strand of your pink floss. To start, go through the leg hole opening to hide your knot. You'll want to sew a stitch on all 5 toe bean indents to secure it in place and give it some definition. And while you can glue them on to save some time, you would lose the definition that stitching gives it. And once you're finished, you'll just want to tie off on the inside of the leg. And repeat this process for the rest of the toe beans. Next, it's time to sew the X. You'll want to get one strand of your pink floss. You can see through this example roughly where I place it, but you just want to imagine a small X centered on the empty space on the back. Entering through the leg hole to hide the knot, make 2 small stitches to form an X. And then once you're done, you'll just want to tie off on the inside. And now we can start stuffing the body. Again, you can use felt scraps for this, just make sure that they don't show through your felt. Make sure to also pack some stuffing into the legs to help give them some shape. To close up the body, we'll want to use one strand of your body color floss, and we'll be doing a blanket stitch. You can start wherever you prefer, but I personally like starting from the middle. I'll blanket stitch to the end of one leg, tie off, and then restart from the middle, and repeat. And it'll be the same process as before for restarting a blanket stitch. The only thing is that this angle makes it a bit harder. And then just repeat that process for the front leg opening. We're at the home stretch. You'll want to get a needle and insert it through the head so that we can pin it onto the cat's body. You can have the cat's head facing straight, to the side, or at an angle. You'll want to get one strand of your main body color floss, and we'll be doing a ladder stitch around the base of the head to the body to secure it. I start by going through the neck to hide the knot. And then I'll go around a couple of times until the head feels secure. once I'm done, I'll tie off at the base of the neck to hide the knot. Then I'll just go through the head one last time to hide the end of my thread. And that's it. I hope you love your mini cat. And if you made one, I'd love to see it, so tag me at mugiiart. I'm on pretty much every platform. I'm also thinking about making a future video on how to make a more detailed cat, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like to watch. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments or send me an email and I'm happy to help. You can also find me on my other socials where I share more of what I'm currently working on. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.